Welcome everyone to this webinar that VPA and Latimpacto are co-organizing, Innovative Financing Mechanisms for Social Impact, Perspectives from Latin America and Europe. So good morning from people joining us from Latin America and good afternoon for the Europeans. I'm happy because this is already our second research webinar together, and the purpose of this today webinar is to present the translation in Spanish and Portuguese of one report that EVPA realized in 2018, which is called Financing for Social Impact. I'm Alessia Gianoncelli, the head of the Knowledge Center at EVPA, and today I will host this webinar with Karina Suarez, CEO of Latimpacto. So we are very glad to have with us two experienced practitioners that will share their experience and also their perspectives on about hybrid finance and innovative financing mechanism to support social impact and social purpose organizations. And what is important to highlight is that they will be able to bring their expertise looking at both regions, so Europe, but also Latin America. So welcome to Marta Garcia from Social Finance UK. Marta is a director and co-lead of Social Finance International team with direct responsibilities for social finance work in Spain and in Latin America, and for building a network of practitioners in the region. Marta plays an active role on social finance market building efforts by providing advice, support and insight to key stakeholders in countries outside the UK. So welcome Marta, and then happy also to have Alexander Lindeboim from Right Capital Wealth Management Brazil. So Alexander has over 26 years of experience in field of law and taxation and has worked in the areas of mergers and acquisitions, wealth management, succession and tax planning in Brazil and also abroad. And as well as being one of the founding partners of Right Capital Wealth Management, he was previously partnered at Vinci Partners in the area of wealth management. So welcome both. It's really an honor to have them to have you with us today to really explain us in depth the essence of hybrid finance and innovative financing mechanism. So before diving into the topic of today's webinar, I would like to address some housekeeping rules. So we are using GoToWebinar. Throughout the session, you will be able to open or hide the control panel, which is the console that appears on the right-hand side of your screen. Very important, we will have 20 minutes for Q&A session. So if you do have a question, don't hesitate to write it down in the relative section of the control panel. You can see it here on the screen at any moment during the webinar, because then we will be able to collect your questions and to ask these questions to our speakers that can share their experience with us. And don't forget to mention to whom you would like to address your question, so it will be easier for us then to moderate the Q&A session. Then, of course, since the number of participants in this webinar is very high, we are keeping everyone muted, but you will always have the chance to share your thoughts with us in the Q&A session of the control panel. And then this session is being recorded, and you should be able to watch the recording and consult this presentation as of next week on our website, and we will be sharing all the details afterwards as EVPA and also Latimpacto. Last but not least, in case you are experiencing any technical issues during the webinar, you can always contact my colleague Arnaud Picon. You can see his email here on the screen. So it's apicon@evpa.eu and .com. Some details on the agenda of today. So there will be Karina from Latimpacto giving an introduction, explaining a little bit what Latimpacto does and also its relationship with EVPA and our other sister organizations. Then I will give you a presentation of the report of EVPA that Latimpacto translated in Spanish and Portuguese. Then we will have the intervention from Marta with her perspective from Social Finance UK. Same for Alexander. So they will have both 15 minutes each. And then we will have, as I mentioned earlier, 20 minutes for Q&A. And then Carolina will close this webinar with few information. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Carolina and give her the floor for her first introduction.
Thank you, Alessia, and thank you everybody that is here with us, particularly to Alexander and Marta. Thank you very much. I want to reiterate a warm welcome to this webinar in which we are launching the translation of the financing for social impact, the key role of Tailor financing and hybrid finance into Spanish and Portuguese. I am Karina Suarez, the CEO of La de Pacto, the newly established Latin American network of venture philanthropists and social investors, created with the leadership of distinguished leaders from the social investment sector across Latin America, and with the support of the International Venture Philanthropy Center. Maybe you can show the next slide, please, Alessia. Yes. In La de Pacto, we are a community of philanthropists and social investors, and we are connecting and mobilizing capital, human, intellectual, and financial, committed to achieving more and lasting positive social and environmental impact by promoting the exchange of knowledge on the most innovative and effective models of social investment, management, and impact measurement, and by facilitating connections for greater collaboration and co-investment. So here we are, and maybe you can show the next one, please. So here you can see the map. We are an independent network, but we are very proud to be part of the global movement of venture philanthropy networks. We are connected to the largest community of global social investors, more than 1,000 organizations who are members of the European Venture Philanthropy Association, EVPA, the AVPA, the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network, plus those engaged with Africa by the Asian Venture Philanthropy Alliance. So we are diverse people with synergies and perspective, sharing knowledge and mobilizing more capital. The next, please. Yes, as a network in Latin America, we meet the same guiding principles of our sister networks that we can see in this slide. But I just want to mention and focus in two of them that I found critical for understanding better our purpose and also the topics that we will cover during this webinar. So the first slide that I want to mention, that is the first principle, sorry, is the principle 1 that you can see in the next slide. And yes, the next, please, Alessia. So here you can see one of our guiding principles. We are the unique network in Latin America that gathers a diverse type of investors, breaking down silos and encouraging collaboration across them, as you see here. So we connect professional service firms, family offices, government, corporations, investors, academia, and the idea is that how we can build a vibrant community of a global social investor, and also how we can connect them with the members of our sister networks to improve effectiveness along the region. And all of them, as you can see here, are providers of capital. And as I mentioned before, we understand capital in a broad sense, intellectual, financial, and also professional capital. So for us, it's very important to bring these people. And actually, if you see in the next slide, that is another principle that we meet. Yes, for us, we aim to support the social ecosystem through the continuum of capital. So we are looking forward to leveraging a range of investment practices from philanthropic grants to full market rate return impact investment, including talent and intellectual capital. We understand that investors can leverage its practices through supporting the needs of social purpose organizations at different growth stages and to structure their portfolio for maximum impact. Therefore, the spectrum you are seeing here is one of our guiding principles, where we understand the importance of improving the investing for impact approach that Alessia will explain later in detail, and how it connects with the importance of tailoring financial instruments to the needs of the social purpose organizations. So we can explain later in detail this spectrum, and I'm sure that Alicia will cover it. So the next one, please, Alicia. And this one is the three pillars that we understand when we talk about venture philanthropy. And it is because this report that we are launching today into Spanish and Portuguese is particularly relevant for us because it is focused on one of the three core elements of venture philanthropy, Tailor finance. So today, we understand with this crisis that philanthropists are called to be more innovative than ever before. The current crisis calls us to look at how we can create the most significant impact supporting social purpose organizations. It implies that we need to customize the financial offer by choosing among a wide range of financial instruments we call grants, loans, equity, and hybrid finance instruments. And venture philanthropy organizations can also structure innovative hybrid funds and financing mechanisms through which they can collaborate with other capital providers within the venture philanthropy and social investment space. So the next, please. So it is because we are sure from Latin Pacto that this publication and the webinar that we are having today is particularly relevant for us and for our community. We need to have a better understanding of the financial instruments to the needs of the social purpose organizations by looking at pros and cons of each financial instrument and selecting the ones that are the most suitable based on the business model and the stage of development of the social purpose organization. We are working like the Pacto with our knowledge center that is in process of launching to continue improving the implementation of innovative finance mechanisms. And we are glad today that we have my colleague from EVPA, Alicia, and also two speakers, Alexander and Marta, that are widely recognized leaders from Europe and Brazil. Marta working also in Latin America with the Red Latinoamericana de Bonos, who will give us an outstanding perspective of how we are working and how we are progressing in implementation of the financial instruments and the challenges that they have found. So thank you very much, and I hope that you can enjoy this webinar today.
Thank you.
Yours, Alicia.
Yes, thank you, Carolina. So just a small tip for the audience. The slides turn a little bit slow, so don't worry, we are on them. So as Carolina was saying, now I would like to guide you through the report, starting from showing to you the Charter of Investors for Impact. So as the VPA, last year we launched this set of 10 principles that we believe are at the core of the work of Investors for Impact, that are the core of the community of EVPA, and of course looking abroad also of our sister organization. So as you can see here, we identified some characteristics. The first one is that Investors for Impact are problem-focused and solutions-oriented, innovating the way to tackle societal challenges. Then we have highlighted the importance for Investors for Impact to put the final beneficiaries at the center of the solutions. Investors for Impact are also those that are highly engaged for long-term, striving for lasting impact. Then are those that take risks that most others are not prepared to take. And then we are referring again to the three core practices of venture philanthropy, as Carolina was saying. So principle number 5 is about measuring and managing social impact, whereas principle number 6 is providing extensive non-financial support, couple it to the financial support. And then we have principle number 7 that is about tailored financing. So as Carolina was saying, this way in which Investors for Impact looked at the characteristics and the needs of the social purpose organizations in order to choose the most appropriate type of funding they can provide to them in order to increase the impact. And then we have a principle number 8, which is about proactively enhance collaboration with others. Then principle number 9, which is about fostering the mobilization of resources in the social impact ecosystem. And last but not least, we say that investors for impact should uphold high ethical standards. So this is a document that we realized for our 15th anniversary last year. There is, of course, the possibility to sign, because we really believe we needed a sort of document for the movement in order to endorse all these principles. And what is important to highlight is this charter is the result of a collective effort of experienced practitioners from our community. So we really collect lots of insights, experiences. We discuss with lots of experts in the field in order to come up with this definition of principles. And then, of course, we believe these principles should be interpreted as guiding principles for all those that are on a journey of investing for impact. We also acknowledge that other type of factors relate to some of these principles, but what we believe is that the DNA of Investors for Impact is reflected by the 10 principles. And of course, we see this charter as an invitation to others to collaborate and co-shape the larger impact ecosystem. But why I'm presenting to you now the charter? Because, as you can see here in the slide, there are 3 principles in this charter that are linked to the topic of the report Financing for Social Impact. So again, Tailor financing, principle number 7, and the principles related to it, hybrid finance, are principle number 8 and 9. So really this idea of encouraging and enhancing collaboration, and also foster the mobilization of resources into the social impact ecosystem. So as you can see here, this is the report. So this is the English version we have launched in 2018. And as you can see here, there are 2 distinctive parts included in the report that are also interconnected. So we have Tailor financing and hybrid finance. I will give you some insights on Tailor financing, but the webinar of today will be focused, especially thanks to the interventions of our speakers, Marta and Alexander, on hybrid finance. Just for you to know, this is what the report is about. So this report analyzes how funding can be shaped to better support social purpose organizations to maximize their social impact. And again, we see a crucial role for both Tailor financing and hybrid finance in order to provide better financial solutions to social enterprises, social purpose organizations. This report has been an effort made together with 28 experts from the field. So normally at the VPA, when we put together research reports, material, and when we developed content, we always do it together with practitioners, and we do it for practitioners. So we tend to have these very practical guides in which you can find really the expertise of different actors active in the space, such as, again, practitioners, but also academics, representative of European institutions, and consultants. And then what is most important to highlight here is that in the report, you will be able also to find practical cases from our members. So I will not go in depth into all the cases included in the report, but I invite you to download for free the report on our website. That now, thanks to the collaboration with Latimpacto, is also available in Spanish and Portuguese. So you will receive this presentation. You will be able to access this presentation from our website. So all the links are included there. The link is the same. You will find the English version and also the Spanish and Portuguese one. So just to re-give you a definition on Tailor financing. So as Karina was saying, when we talk about Tailor financing, we are really talking about this one-to-one relationship between an investor, a venture philanthropist, and an investee, a social purpose organization. So we are talking about a process in which really the investor focus on the needs and the characteristics of the investee in order to choose among the variety of financial instruments. It's important to say that when we talk about venture philanthropy within our networks, we also include grants, of course. So we're talking about grants, we're talking about debt, equity, and hybrid financial instruments. The idea of Tailor financing is really to look also at the risk profile of the investors and understanding what is the best financial instruments, also looking at it from the investor's point of view. And two important characteristics on the social purpose organization side is the business model and, of course, the stage of development, because as you can see in the guide, there are different recommendations for different stages of development and also different business models. So there is also, if you go on our website, and as Karina was showing, we have the spectrum of capital providers, and there you can also find different types of social purpose organizations supported, looking at their business model, so at the stage of development. So you will see where we try to couple in this spectrum both sides, the investor side and also the investee sides. Just for you to know, we have come up with a framework, which is a three-step approach to Tailor financing. I won't go in depth into this topic because, again, I will give more time to hybrid finance, but just for you to know, you will be able to find insights on these three steps in the report, starting from step 1, which is about assessing the preconditions of the investors, the venture philanthropist, because what is important, of course, is to understand what are the financial instruments that you can use as an investor. So what are also your expertise, but also the legal constraints that you might have in certain countries in order to use an instrument, financial instruments instead of another. So this is, of course, the first reflection that a venture philanthropist should make. The second one is, the second step is assess the financial needs of the SPO. And again, as I was telling earlier, business model, stage of development, capability of the teams of the social purpose organization to deal with different type of instruments. These are all those characteristics that an investor, an high-engaged grant maker, a venture philanthropist should take into account while deciding which instruments is most suitable. And of course, in the guide itself, you can find the definition and the explanation about all the different instruments, so grants, loans, equity, but also hybrid financial instruments. And you can see what is then the solution, the ideal solution that you can apply in step number 3, so the real match. The real matching phase, when you should put together the goals of the venture philanthropist with the needs of the investee. Taking into account all these different elements, you can then probably come up with the best solution. Then, of course, if you have questions, you can use the question box, and then we will try to answer your questions. One information is that if you are not able to answer all your questions during this webinar, then we can follow up with you individually to provide you with the answers. Then, hybrid finance, so the real topic of today's webinar. We have put together a definition in the report, and of course, I mean, hybrid finance is really a hot topic. I would say everyone tends to talk about this hybrid finance, this concept of putting together different capital providers, in certain cases also different types of instruments. So if when we talk about Tailor financing, we are really referring to this one-to-one relationship between the investor and the investee. When we talk about hybrid finance, instead, we're talking about the collaboration among different actors, sometimes again using different financial instruments. And when we talk about different actors, different capital providers, we are also talking about their different profiles in terms of risk, return expectations, but sometimes also impact expectations. So the beauty, I would say, of hybrid finance is really the capacity of bringing together different capital providers and attract more resources into the impact ecosystem. So again, if you think about the Charter of Investors for Impact, this is really the essence of principle number 8 and 9. So work in collaboration with others and foster the mobilization of resources. In the report, we have identified two main categories linked to hybrid finance, which are hybrid financing vehicles. Here we are talking about hybrid structures at fund level that are developed in order to provide finance to social purpose organizations in a more efficient way, while also satisfying this different risk, return and impact profile of investors. So you should think about a fund which is called an hybrid fund, because then there are different layers of risks. There is normally a financial intermediary that takes care of deploying the money in order to satisfy the needs of different social purpose organizations, while again satisfying the appetite of the investors. If you are interested in this, in the report there is the reference to a report made by Fase and McKinsey, which is talking about how to put together an hybrid fund, in which you can really see technically how this might work in practice. So again, you will find the reference in the report, and you will also find some practical cases of organizations, especially in the UK, that are already doing that. The second type of way of doing hybrid finance that we have identified in the report is hybrid financing mechanism. Here we're talking about contracts, about schemes that are developed in order to increase the resources brought to impact-oriented investments. How? By the risk in traditional capital. And what is important to highlight here is that when we talk about traditional capital, we're not just talking about retail or commercial capital or more traditional investors, but we're also talking about the public. Today, Marta will give us examples on this section of the report. And before going in depth also in what is included in the report, looking at financing, hybrid financing mechanism, I just would like to summarize what are the main objectives of hybrid finance. So again, increase the effectiveness in supporting social purpose organization, increase the resources brought into the VPSI space, so into the venture philanthropy space, into the impact ecosystem, and also reduce the risks associated with achieving impact or financial goals. And here again, you should think about the variety of factors that might be involved in hybrid finance. That's why we're talking about the risking, reducing the risk of achieving impact, but also financial goals, because you can have different type of factors that come into this mechanism with for different reasons. So it's also good to have in mind that we are talking about the risking failures in terms of impact achievement and also in terms of financial goals. Then for you to know what we have included in the report, I will go a little bit more in depth into the financing mechanism. And again, if you have any question, feel free to ask them in the chat box. And if you will have a look at the report, you will find lots of examples that might help you understand the differences among the different mechanisms. So, as you can see here in the report, we have included two main examples of hybrid financing mechanism. So the first one is outcome-based mechanism, and the second one is guarantee schemes. You can see, I will just give you some basic definitions of social impact bonds, development impact bonds, and social success note. And then again, Marta will give us example on social impact bonds and explain us how they work in practice, and then guarantee scheme. So as you can see here in the slide, outcome-based mechanism are contracts financed by a risk-taking social investor to de-risk the investment for other type of actors such as public entities, philanthropic donors, and commercial investors. Here you have a definition, a really basic definition, I would say, about social impact bonds. Marta will provide us with in-depth insights on it, and they enable federal, state, and local governments to partner with high-performing service providers by using private investment to develop, coordinate, or expand effective programs. In the report, you will find the example of Peterborough, which is the first SIB in UK that has been developed in the UK, but also an example of Cois Invest that set up Duo for a Job, which is the first SIB in Belgium, for example. And then we have development impact bonds. Basically, they work like the SIBs. So the only difference is that they have been, they are realized in development context. And in this case, the outcome payer is a philanthropic organization or a development aid provider. And then in the report, you will find the example of Educate Girls, which involved UBS Optimus Foundation as social investor and as outcome payer Children's Investment Fund Foundation. So the idea for both mechanisms is really that there are pre-defined outcome indicators, impact indicators that should be reached in order then to repay a return to the investor that take the risk. But I don't want to go in depth into this because Marta will give us examples, being Social Finance UK, basically the pioneer in Europe, and you will see also in the world linked to social impact bonds and impact bonds. Then the last example that deserves a mention here is social success note. It's something that has been developed by the Rockefeller Foundation and Social Business, which is a mechanism that involves commercial investors that provide the social business, the social purpose organization, with concessionary loans. And in case the social outcomes are reached, both the commercial investor but also the SPO itself receive a premium from the donor. So it's really a way of incentivizing the SPO on one side, but also the investor to do good in order to achieve the impact promised. And then last, guarantee schemes, which is really, a sort of mechanism in which there is a promise by one party, normally the guarantor, to assume the debt obligation of a borrower in case of borrower defaults. This is slightly different from the outcome-based mechanism. You can find information in the report, but I won't go into this because then I don't want to confuse the hair. Let's focus today on outcome-based mechanism, especially because Marta, who will give us the next presentation, will focus on this as well. Last, Why use impact bonds rather than traditional funding? Here we have listed some reasons. You will find them in the report. On one side, it makes money more effective because, again, you are coupling your tying funding to measurable results. So you basically impact bonds, innovative financing mechanisms, reduce the risk of funding programs that don't work. Then they allow providers to adapt to change because there is this shift of the focus from activity to impact, which is translated in reimbursing results rather than receipts. And really this focus on impact instead of activity, it's helpful in order to provide the service providers with more flexibility to do what they have to do in order to get the result expected and promised. And then impact bonds, hybrid financing mechanism incentivize better programs, again, because there is this high focus on results. And last but not least, help the private sector also to focus on social issues, because when you have this attraction of more traditional capital, also on retail capital, on commercial capital, you are really able then to stimulate also this private sector to think about how to solve better social issues. So I would like now to address a few questions to you, the audience, before giving the floor to Marta. So we have 4 questions for you. It's also a way to understand a little bit who is online today with us. So I will ask my colleague to start with the first poll. So of course, if you still have questions for us, you can use the box. Otherwise, now I would like to ask you this question. You should be able to see it. So are you familiar with the concept of hybrid finance? Yes, I'm already involved in hybrid financing mechanism or vehicles, thinking about what I have presented. Yes, I'm familiar. No, I'm not familiar. So I see now that 43% already voted, and which is good. Now it's more than 50. We can continue a little bit, so please vote, because then we can share with you the results. So I see that 54% voted, so 49% is familiar, so the second option, and then 40% is not familiar. So hopefully after this webinar, but probably after reading the report, you will be more familiar. And then only 12% is already involved in hybrid finance. So hopefully, again, thanks to our speakers today, but also to the insights included and the examples, you will be able to start reflecting on how to get involved. Second question. Has your organization ever been involved in hybrid financing mechanism or vehicles? So this is for those that are also familiar. So it's yes, no, but we are currently exploring the possibility. No, but we hope to get involved in the future. And no, and we're not interested in it. So I see, wow, there is really one third. A small percentage is saying no, and we're not interested in it, which is pretty promising as a result at this stage, I would say. So almost half of you voted. So let's continue for a few seconds, and then I can read the results. So yes, let's close. It's 53% voted. So it's yes, 1/3, basically 28% has been already involved, which is very interesting. The other third, again, 31% no, but you are currently exploring the possibilities. So again, hopefully this webinar will help you identify some good and innovative possibilities, and 35% no, but we hope to get involved in the future. Again, really great results. Only 7% is not interested at all in hybrid finance. So next question. If yes, this is for those that have been already involved. So this 28%. So next question. If yes, in which ones have you been involved? So looking at the definitions that I just shared with you, outcome-based mechanisms, SIBs, DIBs, or social success notes, hybrid financing vehicles. So the other ways of being involved in the hybrid finance, first loss mechanism, guarantee schemes, or others. So voila. Okay, so half of you, more or less, yes. We can close, I think, 20% voted, and considering that only, yeah, a small percentage was already involved. It's 43%. Yes, you have been involved in outcome-based mechanisms such as SIBs, DIBs, or social success notes. You can also use the chat box to tell us more about this, to share some links. So we will look into them. It's always useful for us to look at practical examples. 30% have been involved in hybrid financing vehicles, only 3% in first loss mechanism, and 23% in others. So I also invite those that marked others to share with us the specific hybrid financing mechanism or vehicles, or whatever kind of innovative mechanism they've been involved. Last questions. If yes, in which geographical areas? So in Latin America, in Europe, or in other geographical regions? So let's make the last poll starting. I see I see a great percentage going into LATAM, which is very, knowing the audience, it was a little bit what we expected. So yes, I think we can, yeah, we can close. 38% voted, and we have 86% in Latin America, 4% in Europe, and 10% in other geographical areas. So these results are really interesting, are in line also with what we have expected, I would say. And again, don't hesitate to share your experience using the chat box, so we can also contact you in case we would like to showcase more examples, especially looking at Latin America. So without further ado, I think I'm already running a little bit late. I would like to give the floor to Marta. So Marta, the floor is yours. And again, if you have any question, the chat box. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to this webinar today. I'm delighted to be here. And as Alessia said before, I am the Director of International Team at Social Finance UK, which means that I work everywhere but in the UK. And in particular, my area of responsibility is within the team. I lead all the work in Latin America and in Spain, and I've been really fortunate over the last almost 7 years to be working very intensely in the Latin American region. And in that time, I've had the opportunity to see the flourishing of a market for hybrid finance in the region. And I would love to share a little bit of a perspective on it, which is not the only perspective, but it is a perspective that includes the views of many different actors. Because as part of our work, we've been collaborating with governments, with investors, with philanthropy, with academics, with professional services firms, and with a number of other players that have all been very intent on developing a market. Today, I'm going to focus on impact bonds, not because they are the only hybrid finance mechanism that exists, as you have been, but mainly for 2 reasons. One is impact bonds is what social finance is known for internationally. So in the UK, we do a lot of other work. Internationally, this is what we've done in the majority of cases, and this is why people want to talk to us. And in particular, it is why we started our work in Latin America. So that's one big reason to talk to you about that. The second big reason is because social impact bonds and development impact bonds are not just a financial mechanism, they've also opened up really, really important questions about how we fund development, about what is an important outcome, what is an outcome, and what do we really value, about the role of different actors, be it the public sector or civil society or the financial sector in fostering social change. And also they've opened up very important questions about what is a good use of resources, and at what point who needs to bear the risk of really pushing for things that are really difficult to do and where the chance of failure is high. So all of those conversations have been opened up by this instrument, not by itself, but to a great extent. And we've been lucky enough to be part of those conversations. So that's why I want to start talking to you about impact bonds. So if we go to the first slide, this is purely for illustration. I'm not going to run you through everything that's in it, but I just wanted to show you that impact bonds are very young. They've only been around for less than a decade. And you can see that only in the UK from 2010 in December, when the first one launched, the Peterborough SIP that Alessia was referring to before, until 2019, we've gone from 1 to 75. And this is with an instrument that requires a huge amount of collaboration from all sectors in ways that they have never worked together before. So it is not just a financial instrument, it's also a cultural shift in the way that different actors in the market work. And that's why this trajectory of growth is so important. In the meantime, in the world as a whole, we've had almost 200 impact bonds launched in 27 countries. That's outside the UK, and 450 million in capital have been mobilized, US dollars. Now, obviously that's tiny compared to the amount of money that is spent by the public sector or that is spent by investors worldwide and even by impact investors. But still, it is a pool of capital that is being deployed in a very different way. And that's what we are going to be talking about. So if we go to the next slide, Alessia has described very briefly what an impact bond is. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the mechanism, but let me just show you very quickly with an example what it looks like. And instead of using Peterborough, which is the one that is best known, I'll use one from the region, which I think is always helpful to see what's being done in Latin America. And this is an example about the Buenos Aires employability SIP. And what we have there is a group of social investors, which in this case was mostly a collection of corporate foundations and sort of private individuals who pulled together an amount of funding to fund the activity of a collective of civil society organizations, NGOs, service providers, effectively people that were working around the issue of employability with vulnerable populations, and who agreed to collaborate to launch a program that was really focused on getting employment for a very vulnerable cohort of youth who lived in particular parts of the Buenos Aires, of the city of Buenos Aires, in what would be the equivalent of the favelas in Brazil, so in villas, which are actually places where the opportunities for employment are very low, where the population doesn't have a lot of ways to keep their livelihood. And a lot of these youth were being systematically shunned out of the labor market. And this is what they committed to do, these service providers. They committed to getting employment for these kids and actually to keeping them in employment. The SIP has launched, and the idea is that as these kids get into employment and manage to maintain that employment over time, which obviously increases the chances that in the future they will have unemployment, that they will progress in their careers, and they will actually be able to make a living for them and their families, the results would be measured and a payment would be made by the government to the social investors who had put up the money up front. So you can see how the circle goes. The social investors put the upfront funding in, the service providers design a service that is really tailored to the needs of the service users, in this case, the youth, the unemployed youth. There is a process of evaluation or verification that the results are being achieved, and these results are really measured in terms of employment and permanence in employment. And then the outcome payer, which in this case is the government of Buenos Aires, then pays for the results that are achieved. So that's a very simple example of how it works. I think what's important is what's behind it. What's behind it is a cross-sector collaboration where every partner, be it the investor, the service provider, or the outcome payer, is actually doing what they know how to do best, all in pursuit of one outcome or a series of outcomes, but they're the same outcomes in every case. And these outcomes are the employment of youth. They're not focused on the financial impact, they're not focused on a series of activities or a series of inputs. They're actually focused on a final outcome for the beneficiary. So the service user is at the center, which is one of the principles that was shared before by Alessia. The other thing that this does is it gives a massive amount of flexibility, especially to the service providers, as to how they do this. In the past, the service providers were used to being hired by the outcome payer, by the government, to deliver capacity building for youth. And they were told, okay, you need to deliver 3 sessions for every youth that crosses your door. Never mind that those youth may actually don't need capacity building in a particular area. What they may need is someone that helps them write a CV, or what they may need is someone that connects them to an employment opportunity. What they were being paid for was effectively giving a lesson. And it didn't really matter whether the lesson was actually aligned with what the market needed. In this case, the whole thing works because what you're measuring is the final outcome. Does the youth get a job, and do they stay in that job? And then they can do whatever they want. They can provide the service and really adapt it to the need of the service user, which means that effectively it works better. And I think the third thing that sits behind this, and which is really important for the payer, whether it's government or a donor or a big funder, is that there's a really transparent use of the resources and really efficient use of the resources, because they're no longer paying for something that may actually never get a final outcome. What they're paying is for the outcome. And so a lot of the risk of whether the outcome is achieved or not then falls into the investor, who has the power to take that risk and who decides voluntarily to take that risk. So in that sense, it also solves a problem for the outcome payer, especially in contexts where funding or public resources are not extensive. So that's what makes them attractive. If we go next to the following slide, we will see a little bit of how they came to be in Latin America. So impact investing and pay per outcomes, in the sense of government offering sort of bonuses to a service provider if they deliver particular outcomes, have been present in the region for a long time. And they were already there pretty productively since the early 2000s. In 2013, the Inter-American Development Bank kicked off a broad-ranging effort to try to introduce the concept of SIVs to the region. And they did a number of things. On the one hand, they started a number of market education activities so that people could become more familiar with the concept and why it was interesting. The second thing they did was sort of map the ecosystem and try to understand what might be the specific barriers to each of the countries, because obviously they're all different. And they tried to assess what were the big obstacles that would need to be surmounted and what they could do to get over those obstacles. And they also started commissioning small pilots to see whether we could come up with a working model for a country or for the region that other countries could look at and say, oh, actually, it does work here. These are the adjustments that I need to make. In the process of doing that, and this was an effort of many years that the IDB supported, there was a lot of insight developed, a lot of networks developed, and a lot of local champions. And that's what's become really important, the local champions. All of that has culminated eventually with something that, again, Alessia referred to before, which is the LATAM Network for Payment by Results, or Red LATAM is what we call it, which is a collective of organizations who are very committed to growing this market and to ensuring that SIVs are introduced in the region in a way that is appropriate and that really responds to the needs of the region. And this network has participants from not every country, but all of the countries where they're having live efforts to introduce SIVs, and they've come along in this collective And it's basically promoting the growth of the market, it's promoting learning. So there's a lot of interaction between members to share learning and accelerate the development of new instruments. And it's also promoted adaptation. So where I want to go next is to tell you a little bit about what has been learned, or actually, let me give you a little map of where we are now. If you move to the next slide, Alessia. So this is the state of play today. What I've noted here are all of the examples of things that are either operating already, or they're in contracting, or at least having fully designed. And you can see there are quite a lot of examples. Colombia is probably the country that is the most advanced at the moment. They've completed an impact bond totally. They have another one operating, and they have an outcome fund in contracting, which effectively is a way of pulling funds together to launch several impact bonds at the same time. But then there have been examples all over the region, in Mexico, in Peru, Brazil, Argentina, and importantly, there are new countries that are not yet here in color, but where new efforts are being made to introduce the concept. So Uruguay and Paraguay are probably the ones that come to mind, but there's probably other efforts going on across South America, and also some in Central America, which I haven't reflected here. So it's starting to bubble up, all of these things. But there are some things that we are learning as we do that, and that's really what I wanted to bring to your attention. So if we move to the next slide. I've divided this into almost 4 things that make the region and each of the countries different. And I think we need to be careful not to think about LATAM as one homogeneous area, because each country is different. There are certain cultural things that are shared, and certain infrastructure sort of models that are shared, but every country has its differences. And the current SIVs and the ones that we use in the UK don't fit the Latin American context necessarily. On the one hand, what we find is, in terms of what the SIVs are trying to address, is that the issues are very differentiated. The scale is often much bigger than what we see in the UK and in Europe in general. There's still a question of access to services, which we tend to see less, especially in Europe. There is a big quality divide, even in areas such as, say, education, where there's been a big push to give access to education to all. You still see a massive quality divide between what the disadvantaged get in terms of quality and what the more advantaged part of the population gets. And then the other thing that is important is that there is a very limited safety net at the moment. So governments are not necessarily spending loads and loads of money already on a safety net. So the way that one thinks about these instruments needs to be different. And I think then there are 2 or 3 other things that differentiate this market as a whole that need to be taken into account when one thinks of bringing an instrument from somewhere else. One is the information infrastructure. So the one of the pillars of SIVs is data and evidence, and there is a lot less data, and the data systems are, you know, like we see in our countries, but it's even more extreme. You know, data is on paper. Data doesn't talk to the other data. You cannot track something from one place to another, and that poses a lot of limitations as to what you can do. The other thing is that regulation and market practices are different. Regulation tends to be more rigid. Governance is sometimes weak in some countries. And there's still quite a number of perceptions around whether it's okay to make profit out of social issues that one needs to overcome when one is thinking about hybrid finance and bringing almost the social and the profit together. And I think the last big thing that we've learned is that the stakeholders are ready in some ways and not as ready in other ways. So we have a public sector where there is high turnover, and from one mandate to the next, a lot of the people go. And so it's difficult to build capacity and build knowledge when a lot of the decision makers are moving on. The fiscal capacity of governments is much more than you have in more developed countries. The service provision on occasions is weak, and it needs a lot of capacity building. And when you come to investment, and I'm sure Alexandra will be able to talk about this, you still find very often almost like a two-pocket investment mentality, where one says, I am making a lot of money on this pocket, this is my investment pocket, and I'm actually giving a lot of it away with this pocket, which is my grant pocket. And almost driving that conversation to a place where the two merge is a path, it's not something automatic. And perhaps the most important, we still still see a fair amount of mistrust or low trust across sectors. And we have a number of examples where the government doesn't quite want to work with the private sector doesn't want to work with the civil society, etc. And that labor of bringing everyone together into a collaboration takes a little bit of time. And so just to finish, I'm going to give you a very quick snapshot of where I think this is going or what we're seeing at the moment, which is in the next slide. And we are seeing three types of, if you want, sort of models. On the one hand, we're seeing a push for scale because precisely the issues we're talking about are big and affect a lot of people. And that's being dealt with through outcome funds, which, as I said before, is a conglomeration of funds from different funders which are trying to launch several impact bonds at the same time, or several instruments, several contracts at the same time. The other thing that we're seeing is that several governments and several countries are engaging in building the ecosystem to ensure precisely that everyone is more ready and everyone understands more, or even that data systems are more prepared to deal with these type of instruments that require so much data. So we see regulatory reform, we see the creation of capacity building entities, and obviously I've mentioned the Red LATAM already, and we see that in, across the region. I've just mentioned there a couple of the countries. And finally, what we're seeing is a lot of creativity and adaptation. So how do we create an instrument that is really fit for the region and for the needs of the region, that doesn't use as much resource on design, that actually can address problems in a much bigger way, that can deal with the problems related to data, that can deal with the fact that sometimes two partners want to work together and they don't want to involve the other one. So we're seeing a lot of innovation and a lot of thinking around how can we adapt this, which in the end was created in a completely different context, to our context so that it does what we want with it. And I'm going to stop there because I know I'm a couple of minutes over time. I'm sorry. I look forward to your questions later.
Thank you so much, Marta, for this in-depth overview. And again, for this focus also on LATAM, knowing the experience of social finance in the UK. It was just perfect. And again, if you have any questions, we are receiving questions, but don't hesitate to use the chat box. And now I'm happy to give the floor immediately to Alexander. So the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, we can. Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, good afternoon to you all in Europe, and to us, most of us in Latin America, good morning or good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. And it's always very nice to understand the perspective of the outcome-based mechanism, which is to learn here in Latin America, as Marta has shown us. My personal background and my organization, as Alessia explained, I'm a lawyer, and I've spent 20 years of my life structuring deals and implementing different types of structures. And so when I decided to leave my career as a lawyer, I wanted to do something more meaningful. I started doing wealth management and advising families. And 5 years ago, I got married, and my wife and I formed Right Capital. From the conception of Right Capital, we decided to only advise families that would accept to allocate at least a small percentage of their wealth in impact investing. And so we started doing that from the beginning. Nowadays, we have 35 families, all of which allocate at least 1% in impact investing. It's basically we do manager selection, and in order to do that, we had to build the ecosystem, really, because the alternatives for allocating capital were not all mature yet, and this is just happening right now. So in the beginning, we took 2 years to approve 2 different impact managers, and in addition to do that, we realized that we needed to step in and help them with best practices, networking, and helping them really to find better solutions to investing together and alongside with some of the families that we advise and they were specialized in specific sectors and could contribute to their cases, we realized that it would be essential to have a positive track record in order to have the impact investment industry really working out and becoming a plausible experience for investors. But then later on, we also identified other cases where, for example, we had the Caete, which is an impact fund for the Amazon region, where they had a mandate of impact investment. They were really having to innovate and test new models. Imagine how difficult it is to become an impact investor in the Amazon region. So later on, we basically learn about venture philanthropy and realize how important it will be to start working from the beginning, from the inception of the entrepreneurs being born, strengthened, and in order to be able to have more cases succeeding so that they could reach the impact investment industry and scaling up or replicating their models. One of the things that we did is we first to convince the financial industry about the importance of investing. And it was very clear from the beginning that a lot of people were quite skeptical and said, look, this is not the type of risk return that we would accept to offer to our networking and to our, to our clients. And the reason for that is because, they're really only focusing on whether or not impact investing will be capable of delivering similar returns to those of the mainstream. And so they were really having the mindset of investing with impact, but none of them were really thinking of, how can I invest for impact? So on the one hand, I had foundations doing either philanthropic work or, really looking at impact only. And on the other hand, those who were really applying the double or triple bottom line where they needed to deliver really relevant returns and having some level of social impact. So in the beginning, in addition to all the investors being skeptical, they were not really familiar with the alternatives that we had. So after we learned about the venture philanthropy approach, we really thought that it would be really the solution for a lot of the problems and challenges that we face, because by being able to de-risk equations, and we would be able to bring different types of capitals together, and we could unlock substantial amounts of funds that were out there and that people just didn't have the key to unlock. So if we go to the next slide, just to give you a couple of examples here where that happened, and I'm really going to focus on the private sector and the financial mechanisms for the private sector working alongside with foundation or concessionary capital. We had a couple years ago the Vivenda debenture. Vivenda promotes reforms, small reforms on houses for the favelas or very poor regions, in order to bring them more health and a minimum of dignity. So, for example, they will come and build a window on a house that didn't have a window, or cover a bathroom, reform a small bathroom, and bring light to the houses, and that increased a lot the health and dignity for those people. And they did that first financing in long term and with very reasonable amounts. This offer, this debenture, but they weren't able to really put the debenture for the market. Subordinated investors that would undertake the risk of the first loss. So first loss was something that was easy to explain, and because of the magnitude of the impact of this financing structure, it was a very interesting way of having hybrid funds in the same structure. So it was placed by Itaú in their private banking distribution, and they were able to distribute. Actually, it's doing very well. And then there's another case which I like to mention. We have Educar in Brazil. Educar, they basically make small films and videos educating individual entrepreneurs to live their passion and to do, but to learn how to sew, to make birthday parties, to do several different types of things as an individual, and they charge like $7 per month. And then when there's doubts or things that people wanted to do to learn, they would send their doubts and they would create new videos. And basically the idea was for them to have 2,000 reais per month, which is about $500 per month. And Mona X, which is a very important mainstream venture capital fund in Brazil, invested on them, and they're running out of gas. And at a certain stage, they're no longer going to be able to raise funds because they wouldn't deliver 20 to 30% returns a year. And so that's when Omidyar stepped in, and basically they were able to accept the lower returns, and they raised a new round of capital. And this is one example that I like to give, because basically when you look at impact investment funds, they in order to raise capital, they need to promise returns of 20 or 30% per annum. And really, if you have to do that, you're going to end up not giving the opportunity for social entrepreneurs. They're successful because they reach economic sustainability levels, but maybe they're going to deliver 3 or 5 or 10% returns per year, but they're not going to be able to be invested by the traditional impact investment industry. So one of the ideas that we've been exploring and telling all the ecosystem in Brazil, and even with some of our colleagues in Latin America, is that we should have most of the impact funds with two types of quotas. One quota for the investor that wants to have the returns and to bring the people that want to learn about impact investing for a plausible experience with decent returns. And on the other hand, I should have either development or local foundations accepting this loss and even redistributing the excess return to the other investors. Because, for example, if I have a grant and I want to allocate my grants differently, instead of just doing traditional philanthropy, doing that in a more contemporaneous manner, that could be quite interesting. So this is one of the things that we've been exploring, because if I can have, for example, a 5% or a 10% return on a fund like that, one investor receives their grants back, the principal back, or a minus 20% return, and the mainstream gets a 5, 10, or 15% return, that could be excellent. So this is a very good example where I could combine different types of capital in the same structure and achieve the results that we need in order to have the ecosystem evolving. And I can see that for three different types of situations. One is just to strengthen the current impact investment industry. The second one is to have new managers being born, because a lot of times when they're born, they're small, and there's a lot of risk because they're not so experienced. So I should have more managers to embrace the social entrepreneur, for example. And third, maybe I could even incentivize the traditional managers to look at their portfolios of investment on venture capital or private equity, identify impact cases, and bring them to the investors. Then just another example that I want to give you of what recently happened in Brazil. We had the need for ventilators here, and one of the impact funds, Vox, had an investment in MagnaMed, which produces ventilators for a lower cost with excellent quality. And because of the COVID, everybody was desperate to have more ventilators, and they were producing like 300 ventilators per year, and they needed to produce at least 6,000. So because of a great networking, and we were able to help those guys, and actually Banco Pactual, which is the largest investment banking in Brazil and in Latin America, gave them a guarantee so that they could raise funds and be able to produce thousands of ventilators. And of course, this was not a hybrid structure itself, but it was really, in practice, it was, because you accommodated a private guarantee in order to reach a tremendous impact. So this is something that I like to explain. In terms of next slide, then, in terms of challenges that we face, I think we really have a lack of track record, and this is something that we should work on developing. You know, the more positive track record that I have, the more I will develop this industry, and social entrepreneurs will have the successful and their business model be scaled or replicated. Second thing is the level of mindset. So people understand about impact investing, but they don't understand that there should be concessionary or catalytic capital that will accept to have a smaller return compared to the traditional investment industry. So a lot of the discussions at the level of the impact investment industry are whether or not I'm going to be able to deliver returns, and whether I would accept to have some level of smaller return. But once you understand that you can have different types of investors with hybrid structures, then it's quite interesting. So, for example, one of the guys at Ometer that I was talking to said, "Oh, if I can invest and there's people having returns as impact investors, I should maximize my return because of guidelines of my board." And I said, "Well, but you only invested in Educar because your board understood the magnitude of the impact that it generated, and it accepted lower returns. So if you're working for Ometer, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, or some other entities that have the venture philanthropy approach and understand it and can do it all and can accept smaller returns, I need to be able to combine different types of capital and cultures in the same type of structures, so that a lot of times I have investors on the one side that don't want to accept smaller returns, and I have other investors that don't care so much about the returns, but really care about the impact. So that's what we're doing when we have this. So if I have, for example, 10 quotas on a fund, there will be, let's say, subordinated will take the first loss, and 10 quotas for the traditional returns. Wouldn't you accept to have one quota for the first loss? I said, yes. I said, so that's how you can calibrate the structure and the idea. And then in terms of we have a lack of projects with robust governance, you know. So we have very small size initiatives. So if we go to the next page, please. We have a lot of funds available that have not been used out there. So just to give you a few examples, we have the Amazon Fund provided by the government of Norway and Germany. We're talking about $1 billion, and really they use very, very little amounts out of this fund because they didn't have projects with proper governance. If you look at USA, they had $600 million per country for the Amazon region, you know, to give guarantees for credit and they only used $12 million last year. Partnership for Force were £100 million, and they only delivered £12 million last year. So there's a lot of situations where we have opportunities to release relevant funds out there, and that's not happening because of the application of the traditional mindset and the lack of understanding about this concept. So this is why we believe Latin Impacto is so important, because this is it's already happened in Europe, Asia, Africa, and it's starting to happen in Latin America. People need to learn about this possibility, about this approach, and really about the importance of catalytic capital that will come and help us to build the ecosystem, the importance of replicating accelerators, incubators, creating corporate and universities programs that will really attack our social and environmental issues. So we're working alongside with the Laboratório de Inovação Financeira. So it's a lab in Brazil with most of the regulators in order to create new investments and improve the regulations here. We have any Impacto, there's advocacy to change legislation. We have Connexus that is doing a formidable work they mapped and classified all of the impact entrepreneurs, dividing Brazil in 8 different biomas. And now, because they mapped and classified, we're going to be able to strengthen those opportunities. So there's a lot of things happening in Brazil. We were in Cartagena last year in November and exchanged a lot of experience with some incredible social investors. And I think there's a lot of things to be done. But in order to do that, and I'll be very honest, this meal that we're celebrating today completely changed my life. And it really gave me the understanding on how we could act, not only looking at the traditional philanthropy and the impact investment industry, but looking at the whole spectrum of the continuum of capital, of which we're big fans of. So it's such an honor to be here with you today. I think time is up, so I'll be glad to provide you with any specific comments or questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Alexander. Very interesting. Lots of examples and references from Brazil. So we have received lots of interesting questions. So I will try to ask some of them to our panelists. We still have a little bit of time. And then again, I mean, I know that my colleagues are already answering some questions via chat, and we will try to do a follow-up with all of you. Maybe I would like to, just start with Marta. There was a question about what is the time frame of outcome-based investments, hybrid financing mechanisms. So on average, I would say, or if you want to give specific tips on the timing an organization should foresee for such a mechanism.
Right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I guess the short answer is that depends on the investor, as you can imagine. The slightly longer answer is that for an impact bond, the typical timeline we've seen is 2 to 5 years. But the reality is that for some issues, and especially when you start getting into some of the things that Alexander was talking about, so when you start getting into the intersection between, say, environment and social and human issues, that tends to be extended because you're talking about longer term issues that cannot be sorted with a very short term solution. So then you start pushing the boundaries. And at that point, you almost need to find investors who are less risk averse and who are happy to wait a little bit longer to see the final outcomes and be repaid. But anything less than 2 years is often not enough to address some of these really entrenched issues that we see need to be sorted, frankly.
Thank you. I think it makes super sense, and it's in line with one of the principles of the charter. We say that if you're active in the impact ecosystem, you should be patient enough because the impact takes time. Yeah. And then maybe a question for both of you. So there is this question about how an organization could start to be part of these initiatives, this hybrid financing mechanism. It starts from a partnership. There are places in which you can apply for specific proposals. So it's a super general question, but maybe you can give us some tips looking at the different realities that you know. I don't know if who wants to start.
Do you want to start, Alexander? Because I suspect you've thought about this yourself.
So
we don't.
I think that the idea is just to, in yes, can you hear me? So
now we can.
So for Latin America, yes, for Latin America, I would recommend that you contact Latin Impacto. Really, they're providing and translating incredible materials, such as this one they're celebrating today. I believe that most countries also have groups that are studying the subject. So here in Brazil, we have a group from inside Jiffy, and is congregating other players from the private equity, multifamily offices at banks, and so on. So I think that the beauty of this network of venture philanthropy is that it congregates different actors with different approaches and mindsets. There's one material that I like very much from EVPA that talks about learning from failures. And it says that if you want to be successful with venture philanthropy, you need to have a prevailing business mindset, but at the same time respect and learn and be humble to learn from those who've been practicing out there for so many years, because otherwise you're going to be like an elephant going to a crystal store, you know. So you need to bring all of these different actors together to build and to, you know, to have an open mind to innovate and things like that. So in Brazil, we have these groups that I mentioned in the slide that you'll see. But I think that the easiest start will be to engage in your region with the venture philanthropy networking that is directly affecting your region. But if you look at the EVPA website and even EVPN from Asia, the best materials are there. And so start by reading, and you'll see good examples, and you'll be easy to engage in a networking to start with.
Yeah, and I guess
I'll for the promotion, Alexander. Sorry, Marta.
No, not at all. So I guess two thoughts for me. One is, as Alexandra said, think about this almost as angel investing. You do it with friends and family. You do it because someone talks to you about something. So the more you can link up to networks that have like-minded individuals, as Alexandra is saying, the more you will be exposed to things that they see. The opportunities are not many yet, but there will be someone who's hearing about them, and then being in the right platform with people who are hearing about this will offer you the opportunity to hear about them as well. So I guess that's one thought. The second one is almost to do what Alexandra did and what he was talking about, people have to do is be clear on what is it that you're seeking out of this, and be clear on how much risk you want to take, understand what your boundaries are, whether you're actually looking at impact first or whether you're looking at finance first, you know, and really try to position yourself and understand what are your red lines, so that when you're talking to someone who's putting something in front of you, you can very quickly say, yes, this looks like the right thing, or actually, no, this has too much risk for me, or no, this is not social enough for me, because that facilitates the conversation a lot. And for those players who are in the market trying to do that matchmaking and trying to find opportunities to link supply and demand, it makes it a lot easier when you have a really well-informed, say, investor or philanthropist, etc., who knows what they care about and how far they're willing to go.
And I know that we are running out of time, but just two quick questions to Marta on two geographies, and then I will give the floor for conclusions to Carolina very quickly, if it's possible. So if some information on Colombia, so which are the specific cases of seeds developed and in progress, if you can just give us some tips. And also there was an interesting question on Argentina, but I leave you to Colombia and then I'll get back to Argentina.
Okay, so Colombia has done the three examples that you saw on the slide were all related to employment and employability. So there's been one SIP close on employability, another one in progress, and the Outcomes Fund is really focused on employability. And that was a very deliberate effort to leverage what had been done before to do things better the next time. Employability, by the way, is probably the one issue that is being looked at in every single country in the region, and especially youth employment or employment for vulnerable populations, one of the two. In terms of what's cooking in Colombia at the moment, there are a couple of efforts afoot that have to do with, one, education, and secondly, children and young people and the issues that affect them. And so those are things in development that weren't on the slide because they haven't come to they don't have a particular shape yet, but they're being explored, you know, in terms of what could work for those issues to get better outcomes around those issues.
Thank you. And last one on Argentina. Basically, I think that the curiosity is what was the, I mean, was the government also doing something, or it was more all what is happening there, a private philanthropy-led initiative?
No, so that's the Argentina one. The Buenos Aires SIB is very much the government as the outcome payer. It's the government of the city of Buenos Aires who's paying for the outcomes. And then, of course, all the implementation is the private sector, is the investors working with the service providers. But that's the way it's normally structured. So government pays and then the private sector delivers.
Thank you. I know that we have so many other questions. We will try to follow up. And again, my colleagues are really trying to answer everything. I would like to thank a lot Marta and Alexander for sharing their experiences. And again, you will be able to access our presentation in the next days, so you will be also able to see again the slides, to find the links. Thank you, Marta, and thank you, Alexander. I will now leave the floor to Karina for the last conclusion and remarks points. So Karina, if you want to take the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you very much. I'm very excited with this webinar. And thank you again to Arnaud, Gianluca, and all the AVPA staff for all your collaboration, and also to Alexander and Marta. I think that you have presented very good insights, experiences from Latin America, and we hope to continue in touch, exploring possibilities of collaboration with all of you that are connected today. As Alexander mentioned, he's our best ambassador, and we are here with Latin Impacto, how we can promote these mechanisms and how we can improve social impact. So next week, as Alicia mentioned, we will share the recording links, the presentation with the takeaways, and all these reports are available at the webpage of EVPA, and very, very soon in our Latin Impacto's webpage. We're in process of launching it. And I also appreciate you can help us with the evaluation of this webinar to continue improving our interactive online sessions. And as I mentioned before, we are looking to continue in touch with all of you. And thank you. Please take care and healthy in these challenging times. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carolina. And again, Marta and Alexander, it was an honor. So thank you for all those that were connected. See you for the next activity co-organized by EVPA and Latin Impacto.
Thank you. And here are our emails, so you can contact us directly to answer all the questions that you have. They are very important questions, so thank you.